You know, I was trying to come up with a way to make my rolls behind the DM screen that much more terrifying, and then I saw one of these big boys and decided I needed to make my own, but I wanted to make it a metallic color to represent the heavy weight that I will put on my players. As I said before, you can use a regular d20, but man, wouldn't the sound of this bad boy behind the DM screen really scare your players when you're rolling and then you just suddenly say, yeah, how about you roll me a perception check? So with that, I found this one online. I'll put a link to it down in the description below. I think it's perfect for my needs to recreate. With that, I take a small little wooden dowel, one that I got at the dollar store, and I'm going to take some clippers and go around the outside of the wooden dowel enough to where I can cut it down. I also take a clear plastic cup. It has to be a big enough cup to fit the dice in, and put a drop of hot glue down at the bottom. I'll show you why here in a second. With a little bit of hot glue on the dowel, put it on the very tip of the d20, enough to where it will be able to stand up like this at the very bottom of the mold. This is going to be your sprue. Now that hot glue that was there before, that's where we are going to hot glue this one onto. I had the smaller one, I tried to make it fit, but I ended up having to swap it out for this larger dowel. Completely soak the top of that with some hot glue, enough to where it will kind of go up the side of the dowel, because we want this thing to be fairly sturdy when it's in there. So we take that hot glue and press it down to the bottom. Now you have to wait for this thing to completely harden, or else it will fall and break away. I had to sit here holding my finger on it for about 5 minutes before I could just barely let go, and even then it is incredibly fragile. While that sits off to the side, we're going to move on to our Mold Star 15 series. This one is my kind of go-to for mold making, and so we're going to use the same amount here. I have to make enough to fit into that large cup and completely surround that big d20. So the best way to check that measurement is to pour in some large cups and then use a second cup that is the exact same as the first one and see how high it will go up there. I thought that this was just the right amount. I thought that the d20 would take up more volume than it did. I definitely recommend going a little bit more than this. I was a little too conservative. But with that, we can start using our vacuum chamber to pull the air out of the mold. Now, if you remember my other video, I learned my lesson not to do it all in one, or else it will pull up, out, and over. So I split the silicone into 2 separate cups so that when it rises here, which you'll see once the pressure goes up, it won't just overflow out of the silicone mold. It will sit here and bubble up. I leave it for about 7 minutes this time, enough for the bubbles to come out to where I don't see any more bubbling. With that, I can turn the vacuum chamber off, blow a little air back in. I was a little worried about that, honestly. The little air might have got in there. And then I go back here. My dice actually fell off of the dowel, and that was a problem because now it won't stick, and I was on a time crunch because the silicone's already started curing. I put some hot glue, hold it down, and do my best to just pour the silicone around it, which ended up working out, but honestly, it might be better for you to double check yourself before you go into this. I kind of had to rush this stage. Again, no super problems here, but I normally like to take my time a little bit more than I was allowed to do here. This was a very rushed job. I let the silicone sit overnight long enough to cure, and then I practice my Dairy Queen application here and turn the cup upside down. With that, it seems like it's good to go. It seems fully cured, and I break the cup out and off. In doing so, the dowel actually comes out of this, which I wasn't expecting. That hot glue kind of turned rock hard there with the silicone. You can see that's going to be the sprue just like my other molds, but it's a bit bigger. Now, because it's so big, I couldn't actually fit my exacto knife down here. I had to use a full long length box cutter. You can see my exacto in the background. I did try, but it wouldn't work. So this isn't ideal, but it works. And I do kind of a sawing motion back and forth going downward, trying to keep it as straight as possible. Now, the proper way to do this is to do zigzags, but because I leave my molds connected at the bottom, you don't need to do the zigzags. It will come back together on its own pretty well. Take the knife, go around the dice on the bottom, and then I pull it out enough to where I've got my dice. And it's got a few scratches on it, but it's still a good looking dice. With this, you can see there, I have my completed mold. I've got the sprue that goes on the top. It's still connected on the bottom. This is exactly what I'm looking for. It's just a bigger version of my other molds. Now, I am going to seal this the same way I do with my other molds, and I was a little concerned using tape on this one. I thought it might be too big and tape might not be able to hold it, but it works. You can see I can open it up here at the top to pour some of the resin in. For the dye or powder that we're going to use in this one, we're using Pearl X Powder Super Copper. It'll give it that really heavy look to it with the metal that I'm going for, and it's fantastic looking. I use Art and Glow resin a lot of the time, especially for a bulk project like this, and I'm going to link the safety data sheet down below, but make sure you're always following proper resin safety by wearing nitrile, gloves, and a respirator, one that is rated for vapors and fumes. So with that, let's get into this, which is pouring both parts. It is an equal volume resin, and I need a lot of it. Here is still a little bit too much, but anytime I use resin, I'm working on a secret project where I take some of that extra resin, so that's fine. I mix that for about 5 minutes, and then I take a huge chunk of this Pearl X powder and pour it on the top, or scoop it on the top, whichever one works for you. And man, look at that. I could just mix that, and that would be a whole video. I feel like that would get me into one of those oddly satisfying videos, and I'd be perfectly happy with that. I think it looks awesome. So I take the little bit of the opening that I can do here and spread it apart with 2 fingers and pour the resin down inside. I pour a little bit overzealously and get it to the top enough to where it goes a little bit past the sprue. It's very hard to see when it's dark down in there, and some of the resin comes out of the side. So this is a perfect example of why you should always wear your gloves. You can see I've got resin all over my thumb there, and that's okay because I was smart and I used my gloves on this one. So safety first, always. With that, I take the tape and go up the rest of the mold, enough to completely seal it off. I throw it in my pressure pot, and then I let it sit for 24 hours in the pot. I really want to make sure that this does cure because it's so big. After that, you can see we've got a perfectly reusable mold here. It stands up fine, it's not going to fall apart, and from that we've got our big old metal looking D20. Very proud of this one. I'm very happy with how it came out. You can see there the tip on the end is a little bit darker. That's just the nature of how the sprue works. I cut the sprue off with clippers and then cleaned it up with an exacto knife. There's still a few scratches on the surface of where the mold lines meet for this dice, but I'm going to clean that up, and if you want to know how to clean those things up, check out my cleaning and polishing video. But now let's move on to the painting, because I do that in the meantime so that you don't have to watch it. So I'm going to paint the numbers with Auric Armor Gold. It's a Citadel color. I just really like the bright shiny gold it gives. I've used it on some other dice and videos before. It's primo for this, and I thought the copper and gold color would work. I also thought about doing kind of an iron or silver, but once I paint it on there, I just wipe it off with a thumb of some sort or a finger, and then you've got yourself a nicely colored number. Because it's got these big, deep number pockets, it makes this incredibly easy. So I paint the rest of it up, which is a much faster time than normal, honestly, because you're able to follow these awesome guides, and we're finished. I now have my big old D20. This thing is an absolute monster to behold, and it is so fun to roll it on the table. It is incredibly pretty looking. I love the patterns that come out whenever you use Pearl X or mica powder like this. It just looks like an ore vein of copper. It's phenomenal. I really, really like it. I think the gold pops as numbers. You're able to see it easy. It shakes the freaking table as you throw it down. You can see my little display stand moving as you throw this down, so I'm sure it will instill fear in the heart of my players, and it is just ginormous compared to my little Bard D20 here. By comparison, the Bard D20 just doesn't stack up. So if you like shiny click-clack math rock things like this, maybe subscribe to become a dice goblin and learn all the other ways that I do things. I like to post tutorials like this, and I also do things on terrain and other miniatures, or maybe share this with somebody else that you might want to make dice with. So with that, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. I hope that you have a fantastic day.